Good evening and welcome to the College of Complexes. May the college please come to order. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody to the College of Complexes. My name is Tim. The College of Complexes consists of the following format. First, we have a brief announcements period. Second, we have our speaker who will speak, which is Peter Perro. And the third part, after it is questions, and we ask that you have questions for the speaker after that. Then afterwards is our infamous rebuttal period, where you get to sound off whether it be on or off topic. I do believe we have a speaker tonight. His name is Peter Perro, and
right here.
Peter, today's news reports on the breakup of immigrant families, cross-border migration, and immigrant upheavals around the world are common media topics. Andy, please. Yet about 150 years ago, things were not better and generally much worse for immigrants. Author Peter Perro will present more than a century of historic evidence. Peter will showcase political cartoons, government propaganda, and classic photos from the darker days of immigration in the world. Our current newcomers to the USA borders doomed to relive a brutal past. How do new immigrant groups show pride in the face of adversity? Join us for some answers. Let's give a big, rousing round of applause for Mr. Peter Perro. Get everything going. It's all set there. All set, Peter?
All right. All right, I want to thank Tim, and most of all, to you folks for your patience. I learned a tech lesson tonight that you be sure to put all your information on one of these little wonderful sticks. And Tim said, why'd you bring the laptop when all you had to do was bring the stick? It's universal, it travels. So I go home to get the other laptop, and Tim showed me how to make it portable. I'm sorry for that delay, a little technical difficulty. Thank you for your patience. Now, I'm here to talk about something in the news often now, and since 2016 and our new Trump around stage of power, has been quite a bit of invective about the wall, immigrants, new immigrant groups, closing the doors, and this sort of thing. So it made me start reading more about, well, what happened 150 years ago with immigrant populations. And it really opened my eyes, and there were two reasons that I decided to put this presentation together. One is that immigration was really a big business 150 years ago for a lot of parties involved that maybe aren't involved today. Hotels to pack the immigrants in and waiting for their ships, and the ships themselves, the accommodations, the travel from your village in your particular home country to the port of disembarkation. So that was one factor that may be greater or worse than it is today. All the domestic profits and shipping, transport processes involved in immigration and migration. The other thing was the treatment, or filters I call them. Medical filters. Are your papers in order? Have you been examined? Do you have your TB exam and your test? If you know anyone who's been through the American system, there's quite a bit of medical testing that has to go on before you even arrive in the U.S. and prove you're in good health. Things like that also affected 19th century immigrants. But on top of that, I was surprised with the idea that if you don't pass at port, or if you don't pass finally in New York or LA or wherever you're going, in those times, I suppose if you were Asian, you were headed to LA. If you were European, you were headed to New York, Philadelphia, even Baltimore. But if you weren't able to pass or enter, even before you left your home country, families were broken up over it. And the ill or sick migrants were separated from their families too. Adults separated from other adults, and yes, even children separated if they were ill or not fit to travel with parents. So this also went on 150 years ago, and it tells me, wow, we're still facing some of these things a century later. So I started looking into travel then and travel now. And I found out a big hub for those of you who may have European roots, Western European roots. In my case, my mom's side Germany, in my dad's case, Italy. One big port of disembarkation was Hamburg, Germany. If you were Polish, if you were a Russian Jew, if you were German, you would disembark at, or board at Hamburg or Bremen, even Antwerp. I found that to be a popular hub. And it's because there were so many trains at that hub in Bremen or in Hamburg, for example, plus river travel, plus the seaports, that it became a big hub. Well, now we have places like Frankfurt Airport or the Rome Airport, if you have the funds and if you have the access to come and to leave Europe to the U.S. Things have changed, and of course now it's not a steamship, but it's an airline. And I find airlines puzzling in that in the time of the steamship, you never got to see first-class accommodations. You took a gangplank down into steerage, and that's all you saw pretty much. Yeah, Bob knows what I'm talking about from legend and maybe from his own relatives. But it occurs to me today, when we take an airline, I walk with my economy ticket through first class, right? You get to see what they're being served. You get to see the magazines and the stewardesses coddling the drinks to the first class passengers. And you walk through that aisle and you think, I wish I were them, but I'm an economy class guy. I got to go to the back of the plane where there's more turbulence, where you get less attention from stewardesses. I can't think of another mode of transport where you're treated to a little glimpse of what you'd have if you had some bucks, and then put you in the economy class.
The red line.
The red line. That's the most democratic mode I can think of. We're all in the same accommodation. But when I thought of Metro, say, sometimes Wolof or Amtrak, shall I say, and say, well, this is a first-class car. Your car's down there. You never get on the first-class car to see how they're treated. And especially cruise ships today, you don't get into first-class accommodations. You go where you're told on your ticket. So it's a little different. And I travel a lot. And I just got back from this trip to South Africa by way of immigrant Arabic Airlines. And I passed a four-way seat in first class, where you could have your whole family in first class, with the movie, with the dinner, three-course meal, with all the liquor, plus four little cubicles where they'd sleep together as a family. And I thought that was sort of like a steamship, but look at all the accoutrements today that you get in first class. I'll talk about steerage in a moment when I show you some pretty horrific photos of about 50 cubic feet of space in steerage. 100 years ago, 150 years ago. But that's a little bit about how the mode of transport has changed today. And first class versus steerage or economy class, as it's said today. Talking about numbers now, and in the 1840s, the first waves came from generally Western Europe, Southern and Eastern Europeans feeding into Western European transit. Over 100,000, the first mark to leave in the 1840s, 1850s. And I'm talking about final destination, the U.S., since this is the point in the news today. Where are they coming from? How are they getting here? Are they legal? In the 1880s, we have a big shift from sail to steam. No longer a sail ship and all the turbulence of that and the length of time, but by 1880s, 1890s, the age of steam and steamships that would cut the passage to half the time. By the teens, 1915, 16, 17, up to the end of World War I, suddenly that flow was cut. There was less migration to the U.S. and more turbulence in Europe that just wouldn't permit travel overseas safely to immigration. But in post-war periods, immigration up again during Depression, 1930s, and post-World War II. Post-World War I, II, and Depression times, a big boost in education from Europe to North America. And when I say North America, I mean Canada also taking in its share. And in South America, Argentina taking in its share of Italians, Asians, and things I've been able to find in the archives. So having said that, and a little bit about travel then, travel now, I want to get to these roots of, or reasons
The arrow
for.
keys, Peter. The arrow keys.
Yeah, are we?
No, the arrow keys if you want to switch pictures.
Yeah, my arrow keys will get me there. Thank you. Tim Balzer, my tech assistant par excellence.
The arrow keys on the keyboard, it'll work better.
Oh yeah, you showed me that. I start with this first, and this goes back to German peasantry getting out of Germany in the 1860s. And the landlord, lord of the manor here, with his snuff box, says, and I found this quote, "But what will make you stay? What will make you all stay, I pray?" And the German peasant says, "Well, sir, if you go away, then we'll stay." In other words, the gentry were part of the problem. Land ownership and what very little peasants had a share in that economy. So you see them with their tools, their shepherd tools, their axes and so on, ready to go to Bremen or Hamburg and exit a very unfair system. Put that aside and talk about some of the slides I was able to find on conditions. These were actually Russian Jews on the run, also gypsies, also political radicals on the run to leave the country, and the gentry, the politicians and aristocrats were happy to see those groups go. Wanted, Auswanderer mit Geld. In other words, Auswanderer are the immigrants with money or the means to leave. This was propaganda or posters showing a better life in the New World if you got the money to get out and leave. So I was able to find some pictures of dormitories in the port cities. And you weren't just arriving from a village, hitting the port and getting on the boat. You needed a night stay, you needed another day to clear municipal customs, to be sure you were fit to put on the boat. And the businesses and steamships were happy about this rule, because if cholera, TB, dysentery were to break out on the ship, you'd have very sick mid-passage where some might just die, perish, be put overboard. You would also be delivering boatloads of sick people. Not great for your business. So you wanted to filter and hire medical doctors to be sure that the people who went on the boat were not contagious with various, as I mentioned, cholera, TB, diphtheria, dysentery. But the way they promoted these, and this is the Auswander house, again, we may have some German speakers in the audience, help me with that. The zum großen Auswanderhaus. In other words, one big dormitory for families to huddle up before their day of boarding the next morning at port. And this was a big business. This was something I don't think goes on in port cities, and certainly not in America with motels or that sort of thing in a big way. But this took many weeks' pay for an immigrant to put up his family in the port city in one of these dormitories. There. The difference between sea travel, and I hope I have a card on this because it's pretty astounding that with sea travel taking so much time out of Hamburg, out of Antwerp, for ports in North America, it was a rough journey. I had some stats on sailing. And with sail, up to a quarter of the cargo, meaning the passengers, could die or take sick from some of those contagious conditions I mentioned. But with steam and with faster journey and more regulation and reform, human cargo could be delivered to port without being perishable cargo. So it was a huge step forward in the 1890s for steamship over sailing ships. But these are promo now. This is propaganda. This is have a wonderful time on our sailing and steamships. I wish this bar would
just hit the arrow key.
Just hit the
Arrow key on the keyboard.
Oh yeah, you reminded me of that. Jeez. Come on now.
Didn't it go?
Come on now.
Peter.
Let's go see it.
You gotta keep 6 feet off.
Here we are. Okay, kind of favor that.
Full screen.
Another way, if you were not legal, and if you were not able to pass medical inspections, was to stow away. And this poor soul, if I can make it larger, can I make him larger? Yeah. Yeah, there he is. And right there. Without seeing those toolbox. Yeah. We've got this stowaway, and they're pushing his head down in a salt barrel here. He's got provisions, and once they tie the barrel, he's good for several days as a stowaway. If he didn't die, he's got plenty of provisions inside that barrel, but I'm not sure what he would do to relieve himself. That's another way to get there. But here's a traditional, can everyone see in the back, or is resolution pretty lousy there? Color. All right, you got that. So I can make it a little larger, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can get it a little larger. No.
That's it.
That's all I'm gonna get.
Yeah, that's good.
We've got decks, and the decks, if I could, yeah, to quote, "We would be broke if we were not for the immigrants," says one steamliner president. They don't require the sun decks, the exercise rooms, the promenades to take in the sun and the fresh breeze, the coffee and dessert rooms, or the cocktail lounges that the first-class passengers seem to demand. And you can see some of that from top to bottom. We've got the sun deck, great way to promenade and show your fashion and show off your family. The grill room, in other words, the tavern, the tap, the smoking lounge, the cruise quarters, even a post office on board, I was surprised to see. And then down here we've got the what is the name for the
Steerage.
Steerage, thank you, steerage. Where you're down in the mechanical section of the boat. Steerage. Just some facts on steerage. You could put 300 to 500 on a typical liner, 300 to 500 passengers in steerage. This bought you, and I think I'll be able to find it, a bunk. And there it is, some of these cots. For, well, let me say, about 50 cubic feet. Now that's the size of today's refrigerators, the double door refrigerators. A ceiling of about 6 feet. One heater of some sort over here, this ceramic heater that puts out, based on engine heat, transferring it to the steerage. And you've got all sorts of people needing the restroom and coughing and communicable things going on. But you got your 50 cubic feet for the cost of, from coast to coast, about 30 US dollars, which if you got here and got employment, industrial employment, was about 3 weeks' wages. So maybe worth investing in the ticket at port. And this is around turn of the century wages. I'm thinking of being a seamstress or a garment worker, making about $8 a week. Go ahead.
Did they sleep on the floor or?
No, these were cots.
Oh, God,
So
okay.
they're not rolling around on the floor. But single men got bunks. Single men got camping bunks like you'd see maybe on a Boy Scout jamboree where you'd have 3. I'd hate to be the third or the guy on top because it's quite a jump, but to the restroom. But then the families got cots. Mom, dad, and they lined up there. Now this is for, again, this is European passage 150, roughly 140 years ago. What else?
Sleep on the floor.
You would not,
Sleep on the floor.
gee, sleeping on the floor would be, gee, I don't know what I'd encounter down there, you know, what you'd be rolling around with.
See you guys. Bye, boys.
Ticket paid in advance, of course.
Okay.
So you're not paying on board. You have to show this ticket presented at the port hotels. In addition to your dormitory fee, you have to present the ticket that you are an immigrant leaving. And you'd have to present this ticket also at medical inspection. And you'd have to have domestic passage in a ticket to take some sort of train or wagon from your village to Bremen, to Hamburg, to Antwerp. So you were investing quite a bit, many months of money for this trip to America, but for so many million worth the investment. I wanted to say, by the 1890s, the shipping companies were held responsible for what they put on a ship, and were held responsible for some sort of what they call them quays. They had to line up. There'd be the Australian port or the Australian disembarkation and those boats. There'd be the South American quay, which was a place where you'd line up and you'd be processed. And of course the North American quay to Canada and the US. So these ports were very busy. Talk next about propaganda. Here was one for the Hapag-Lloyd Company. You might see trains from Hapag-Lloyd, these freight trains that do intermodal transport here in the U.S. I was down in Midway and I saw some of this intermodal from truck to air transfer. And sure enough, the truck said Hapag-Lloyd. So since loading immigrants to steamships, Hapag-Lloyd has been thriving for more than 100 years. But they put out these kinds of glamorous posters. Use our line. White tablecloth, white linen, dishware, china plate, curtains. A lovely trip for you and your family. And here's the bigger look at the dining room. It really looked like a comfortable beer hall of some kind, or food hall, as they're calling them now in Chicago. There's a new food hall down at Willis Tower for tourists. So these food halls were popular. But when you get there, if you're in steerage, this is what you really got. I was surprised to see wooden benches. Not the what did we get here? The individual chairs with the padded seats. But the wooden benches, and wouldn't that make you eat fast? I mean, how long can you sit on a plank? So you eat it and beat it. Metalware for dishware. Big soup bowls you'd share. Metalware, it would look like, I hate to say it, but a bedpan, that sort of pan, that dishware, what are they, coated metalware. Where's the drapes? I don't see them. I don't see the drapes. And maybe a paper tablecloth, or maybe some sort of Muslim wear on the table. The pre-checks by shipping's company responsibility of getting you clear and on that boat. And I mentioned some of the infectious diseases. And again, failure to pass as a family meant breaking up the family. So some of the things we've heard this summer about breakup of families happened often 100 years ago. Because children with diseases, or mom and dad with infectious diseases, needed to be broken up. Or if your legal papers weren't in order, or you had criminal background, dad had to leave the party, mom could go on with the kids, or they all could return home. So, I stopped there with that. Eventually, this happy family made it to Ellis Island. And through all the ordeal, you see steamship in the background. This family was happy to make that. Well, I want to talk about now what happens when they get here and what was some of the greeting. And there was a tremendous propaganda movement against their even coming. Sounds familiar with what we're going through right now with Homeland Security and INS. And lots of cartoons in the newspaper raise lots of interest. Oh, what do we got? Can we go bigger? Yeah, we can get bigger. Yeah, fill the screen. And these slurs were about families and how they conducted themselves, according to rumors. And it wasn't about how hardworking everyone was or pulling together, but here's everybody wants to work but Dad. The father's at the fireplace reading his newspaper, while Mom's in the kitchen doing dishes, Sister's doing the laundry for the week, and I'm not sure about what Junior's doing, but he's passing the thumb to Dad. Dad's taking it easy. Dad, the implication is a lazy lout. And this one was targeted at Irish families. All right? What is home sweet home without mother? And here she is. And the Lord will provide and all this sort of thing. Everybody works in our house, but my old man was the caption. Mom takes in washing, so does his sister Ann. Well, that's just the beginning of some of this propaganda that became hideous and almost sociobiological about the similar countenance of particular immigrants and pups, monkeys, animals. Traits, it was called trait biology, and not very flattering. We've got, on one side, the chimp. On the other side, the immigrant with his new duds, he's new to America. This stuff was real, and this stuff was consumed and sort of fed the fires of anti-immigrant attitude. Here we've got Mulligan's Guard, some sort of dig at the Irish, and they're in their get-up and their costume. This was something about anti-Irish, anti-political radical information or poster cartoons. And we've got the Bolshevik bomb thrower here. He's getting off the boat, ready to light the fuse. The Bolshevik bomb thrower or the Marxists, the socialists, we don't want them, is the implication. So, give him the boot, Uncle Sam here. Uncle Sam's giving them the boot back. And you even see these quays or pigtail. So this Exclusion Act was also aimed at Asian immigrants. And here, Lady Liberty's protecting the Asian immigrant. And we see lots here on the wall about import of Chinese barbarians. Vicious, immoral heathens. If you were closer to the screen, you'd see some of this. Idolaters. John Chinaman is an idolater. And we have the Know Nothing Party here ready to attack, but Lady Liberty is coming to some protection. These things were vicious, yet they were popular even if you could not read, you were illiterate in English. I mean, the nativists would be able to understand these cartoons and it would feed the flames. Uncle Sam's kicking everybody out of bed here. The Chinese immigrant or coolie worker here. And the Native American has his ear, Uncle Sam's. And then finally the answer, I think, in this cartoon is education will be an amalgamating force if we can get social education to broaden us. But we have here, tells a story of immigrant children waiting in the schoolhouse line, for a greeting and protective teacher, sort of protecting the African American child, also to believe in this idea of the schoolhouse as hope for the future. A little difficult to see, but look what the adults are up to. The adults are already beating people who want to come to the schoolhouse door, and the Irish hooligans pulling on the Chinese ear and pulling on cutting his quay or his braids. Not a very peaceful situation or cooperative situation to portray in these Thomas Nast cartoons.
Use the mouse with the arrow on it when you want to highlight a part of the picture.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You can see that. That's why I had trouble tonight getting here, I'll tell you. All right, so we see these. This is the greeting. For all the travel and all the trouble, this is the greeting you get from the American press, and it's infectious enough that nativists also persecute the newcomers. Well, I thought about it for a while, and I thought, eventually, 100 years later, there's some sort of respect. How can I symbolize the respect? And I thought, the success factor, how can I symbolize? And I thought, how about the industries, the jobs, the things they built, the cities they helped create? And I thought, no, I wanted to look at murals. I wanted to look at the pride invested in murals. So I looked at self-help organizations. Oops, Tim, we got one of these that need to turn over. Maybe I'll skip that one, huh?
Rotate it.
We want to rotate it. Yeah, you're right. You're so right. We want to rotate that right under there is the rotation. Yeah, we can move the bar. Oh, there it is. Thank you.
That's good.
There we go. Yeah, I took a trip to Wisconsin this month for Oktoberfest. And there I am, I'm finding that the Turner Hall, a self-help group, still alive and active, participants, users, members, here in New Glarus, Wisconsin, a Swiss town. But also help the same thing repeating itself in Monroe and even in Milwaukee, enclaves of Swiss, German, Belgium. And they were celebrating 150 years, 1868 to the present in America. So I thought these self-help groups are still very much alive. And their idea was a sound, a strong body in a sound mind. And they believed in education, bilingual education, hard work. And I think there is one on Lincoln Avenue. Isn't there the Turner Hall or Turn Hall? Lincoln and Belmont?
Yeah.
That's still there and functioning. It's a kind of gymnasium. The forerunner to the YMCA was Turner Hall. So they had to believe in themselves, and they had to believe in some self-respect and sticking together.
Arrow to advance.
Yeah, there I go again. So I started looking around other neighborhoods that sort of had pridefulness and expressed it here in Pilsen through murals. Now this collection I found from the 1970s, I found it at UIC in their archive. But this collection showed me that even in the 1970s, there was a great movement toward some self-respect and telling their story, their side of the story, from Aztecs to the present. So we see some images of here, Aztec, Toltec, Mixtec, tales and legends of indigenous in Mexico. Passing that on to teens in the neighborhood. And this was a center, maybe Margaret would know about this, Casa Aslan. Casa Aslan.
Didn't they paint that over?
And they have painted that over. It was taken over, Casa Aslan was taken over as a condominium. Oh, if I can get a shot of it. Well, go back to this building. Because it doesn't go back, Tim, doesn't go back very well, but it sure goes forward.
Okay.
All right,
Hit your mouse on the picture.
yeah.
It should go back now.
Should go back now, will it? No.
Don't worry about it.
That's right, Emiliano Zapata, they were praising on this particular. The respects for the rights of others is peace, Benito Juarez, 1840. Los derechos
Derechos de otros.
de otros es paz, es la paz. Benito Juarez, sort of Abraham Lincoln of Mexico. Well, let me get this rolling. I'm hoping it's going to
Is it
move
advancing
forward.
now?
Move forward?
Is it?
Hmm?
Okay, I'll try it now.
All right.
Never mind, hang on.
We want to move forward here.
Use your Spanish mouse.
Yeah, give me a minute.
Yeah. Use my Spanish, my raton,
Ratoncito.
my little raton. Well, oh, well, there's more. Here you go. Yeah, a couple more. And let's open that larger. Yeah. All right. And there's a photo of, artistic rendition of Benito Juarez, Abraham Lincoln of Mexico. In fact, Lincoln and Juarez had quite a bit of correspondence back and forth during the Civil War. Again, more of this heritage, pride in work
Yeah.
and in labor unions, homage to Cesar Chavez. Again, pride of work, pride of labor, the ones that had contributed, and a couple of murals that aren't there right now anymore, have been painted over, but in 1974 these were still there.
Just leave it because she'll leave it. She'll.
Very surrealistic. These were inspired by the painter Diego Rivera, School of Muralism. And if you go to Detroit or New York, you'll see Rivera murals telling the story of this particular immigrant group, the Mexicanos. Just one of many. Very powerful. And this is the building that's been taken over as condominium. And the developer painted
give me a
over
minute.
many of the murals, especially with the little boy trying to open the door. Those were painted over, and there was such an outcry in Pilsen about what happened to those murals that they put it back. To my surprise, the developer put it back. He was able to find the original artist, Ray Padlan, brought him from California. He's in his 70s, so he couldn't climb many of the ladders, but he hired student laborers, student painters, to put from photographs like these, the murals back up. So it was sort of a victory in Pilsen for immigrant respect and not always commercial development is the answer. So this little guy is closing the door, and I wanted to end with him. I think it's a fitting image, and I'll stop with that. Had a couple others that I was able to find on Chicago's South Side, but all about respect, and I think respect is key for what immigrants have accomplished, for what they've contributed and built in this country, and this cloud of rejection, this cloud of paranoia, this cloud of hatred that's come back to us in the last 2 years, I'm afraid, is temporary, and I hope the true American spirit will rise again. So I'll stop with that. and take questions. This is the traditional time, and I know we're running late,
No, you're fine, Peter.
but some
let's-
questions from the floor, please.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, I'm curious, how long did the trip take from Hamburg or
Let's thank our speaker. And he's gonna help you moderate.
both by the sailing ship and the steamboat? And what was the sailing ship?
I tried
How
to-
big was it?
I tried to find stats on that. The sailing ship would take less than 200, but the steamship would take 3 to
Change,
600,
change.
depending on the
But
size.
how long did it take to get?
But how long did it take?
What's that?
I wasn't able to find a lot of stats on that. It depended on weather, but that I would say a week on a sailing vessel, I would say 3 to 4 days on a steamer, depending on weather.
3 or 4 days?
3 to 4 days on a steamer.
Oh, so that was pretty quick.
Steamship. Coming from Bremen, stopping in possibly Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, then Canadian immigrants were free to leave as their destination, and then finally to New York and Ellis Island. Yes. That's the question there.
So why are 90% of the immigrants now non-white? They weren't before. 90% are non-white now, legal and illegal.
Non-white.
Yeah.
And what are the numbers now?
I'm telling 90% at least.
Yeah, I would say, don't be confused. I've got a point to make about migration today. And when I was in South Africa, I talked to many,
Do you have a penny?
they were called Dutch, they still are called Boers, Afrikaners, who came in the 1850s. They are now looking to leave South Africa because they're unhappy with and Mandela has passed, but his party has complete rule, whereas before there was white rule and coalition government if possible. I see some whites on the move now, trying to get into Canada.
Thank you.
Trying to get into London, because they're unhappy with conditions in South Africa. But I'll say to you that most immigrants on the move, on the road now, are people of color.
I know.
And what do we do with
What
that
happened to the Irish and the
situation?
Germans and the British?
Right, I focused a lot on Western Europeans because maybe many people in this room tonight are of that extraction. My father Italian, my mother German, reflected much of the literature that I've found in the archive about conditions in the mid-passage from coast to coast. But you're right, the big issue today is what do we do about Syria? What do we do about Afghanistan? And they're having a hell of a time in Europe trying to migrate to safe passage in, say, Germany.
Get Assad out of power.
We're already there.
Many have come, but many have turned back, have been stopped in rail stations in Poland and turned back, in Hungary and turned back, or forced to go underground and keep going. But for the fortunate ones who do make it to Germany, there is asylum right now, while Mrs. Merkel is Prime Minister anyway. Other questions on that? The world is on the move. I mean, that's clearly, migration is with us and has been with us for 150 years. As much as certain politicians would like to just freeze everything, everyone stay in place and don't come here. That's the general feeling I get, or attitude the Republican Congress has. Tim Bolger.
There has been a guy, his name is, he wrote a book called A Forecast for the Next 100 Years. And what he claims is that once these other countries start industrializing and life becomes better, we're going to actually have to pay people to come over here to do our dirty jobs. What do you think?
I talked to some Turkish graduate students on that subject at UIC, and they said, things are better. Well, were until a couple of months ago. They're going through some tremendous economic upheaval right now, but saying, we want to take our degrees back to Turkey. We're the intelligentsia now, and we have ideas for Turkey. We have Chinese graduate students here saying, grants are better in China. I talked to a fellow at University of Chicago who said, I can get a whole lab paid for and outfitted for me in China based on what I've learned as a graduate student here in Chicago. There is a kind of reverse migration, and Japanese don't come here to stay. Japanese today come here to learn the technology and take the skills back to Japan, take the skills back to Korea, take it back to Turkey in the case of two of my lab friends I met in the engineering school at UIC. So what's our role in it? Well, we make a hell of a lot of tuition from these students. They pay out-of-state rates. So if you go to Urbana-Champaign or you go to UIC, you're paying out-of-state tuition rates, which are twice what an Illinois citizen would pay, an Illinois taxpayer's child or kids would pay at those schools. So I think it's a cottage industry here of educating immigrants, many who want to stay, if they can find company sponsors, but many who are going back now for some better conditions in their developed countries. So, India, not all want to stay. Many want to go back to the burgeoning industries and corporations there in India. So,
The back?
RMC.
Yeah.
You didn't,
point him out.
you didn't talk about refugees at all tonight, did you?
No, I didn't talk about refugee status. And if you can prove persecution by drug lords, murders, and persecutions in Mexico, El Salvador, this kind of thing, there's got to be hearings, there's got to be application before you even leave. On what basis are you claiming refugee status? I think in Syria right now, you could make a case for refugee status. During the Vietnamese War, we made a case for thousands of Vietnamese who, after the war, were persecuted by North Korean troops based on what positions they were in the South Korean army during.
I mean, thinking in Vietnam.
Now we're talking about, Trump wants to put walls, and we want more Norwegians to immigrate, and stuff like that. We start these oil wars in the Middle East, and that's where all the immigrants come from now, and the refugees, because of American oil wars.
And family dynasties like Assad's, and family dynasties like Hussein, Sadat.
Well, I'm talking about refugees.
Pakistani.
I'm not talking about the rich people.
No, right.
Refugees.
Right.
There's.
Just
We
one.
start the war. We make the mess in the Middle East, and then the refugees end up going.
You
to
could
Europe.
argue that, yeah, and that out of guilt we take the refugees back. Yeah, you could argue
it's our
that.
responsibility.
In the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, I would argue that we stirred the pot, and now we've got the refugees to deal with. Yes.
Ellen?
Didn't Trump put that regulation, or I don't know what you call it, order that people from the mostly Muslim countries, they can't immigrate here?
Yeah, that was quite a stir.
I mean, that's still ongoing, right? Because it was upheld by the courts.
2 years ago in 2016.
So like,
he became.
I don't know if maybe they could come if they're refugees, perhaps, but if they're, from
But-
Syria
Well,
or
there has to be an
Iran.
orderly procedure. The Turkish engineers I talked to are Muslim, but their case is based on skills and if they can find work here. If they can find marketable skills in companies that will hire them for their engineering skills, it does not matter in their case that they're both Muslim.
Well, no, I'm talking about which country. Certain countries were
Certain
not
countries.
allowed to come in.
Right,
Right.
yes. That created quite a furor. Yes.
Two questions, if I can sneak them in. Do you have any sense of, I know you talked a little bit about nativism and backlash against
Nativism.
immigrants, but what was the speed at which communities that had assimilated would turn nativist? Was that only whenever the next immigrant group showed up for them to be angry about? Does it happen after 2 generations? Does it depend on what the economy is, where they're living?
There was a nativist party in Chicago. This is in the 1860s, 1850s. They call themselves the Know Nothing political party. And when they ask, are you a member? They'd say, I know nothing. I know nothing.
If I may comment,
So,
Peter, it's about a 20-year period because there was a situation in Georgia for a long time where there was some Mexican immigrants coming in to a certain white area and there was a lot of tension. But what cured it was when the kids went to school, and after about a 20-year period and those kids started growing up, that's when the assimilation process started really well. And it takes, what they said with a big unifying influence was the public schools. And having the mothers meet the other mothers and the kids meet the other kids.
We had that last cartoon of hope. saying
Yes.
The schools will be the great equalizer, the assimilating force. Yeah. If we can get more people-to-people contact, family to family. I want what you want. I want a livable wage. I want my kids to do better. Well, me too.
There's also a big thing with the church.
Oh, yeah, is that a question? Well,
I'm sorry,
we're almost into that.
Why do Americans feel so guilty and take all these refugees? Even though they know it's bad for the country.
I don't think we're taking all their,
Not all of
It's
them.
only like 1% of the immigrants or something
We've
like
got
that.
12 million of them here, illegal.
I think when
Well, those aren't refugees.
When I go back to the Vietnamese situation, the Vietnam situation, there was a lot of feeling of guilt and that we promised the South Vietnamese that we were on their side all the way. And then they thought, oh no, once America leaves, there'll be a massive celebration where they'll be shaking hands again, North and South. There'll be a reconciliation once the U.S. leaves. It was bloody. And then America felt we must take the refugees and bring them back, bring them there. So we have resettlements in places like St. Paul, Minnesota, and southern rural states. We're unusual, but we tried to have a distribution and not a glut in one particular city of Vietnamese. So it's not just LA, but they ended up in distribution and help, federal help to settle in St. Paul, Twin Cities, other cities that have not seen them. Argyle Street. All right.
We're getting close to rebuttal time.
Yeah.
If you guys are lagging on questions,
let's go to rebuttals.
Can I ask one last one?
Yeah, because we do.
Please do.
So, I would agree that the force of history is the movement of peoples around the world. Do you think that would have to go along with free trade? Because there's also a mania for economic nationalism and a return to central planning.
Yeah.
Can a world of central planning and economic nationalism also handle, migration, immigration, and emigration?
Yeah, it seems to me that free trade and free borders go together, and there are corporations that agree wonderfully that yes, give us more low-cost labor. But this wall, this tariff wall, is making enemies on top of the idea of an immigrant wall. I don't understand this animosity, and I think there'll be, when tariffs, a tariff war of, we're taxing the three major things with the Chinese right now are steel, aluminum, and flooding of those solar panels. And we're tired of this kind of thing. But the Chinese are saying that we're not taking your Illinois corn, or your Wisconsin cheese, or your soybeans. So there's a backlash, and the president doesn't seem to worry about this, that in the end he's going to have the upper hand. But corporations, and you think they're all conservative Republicans, but they're opposed to him generally, mega corporations, large corporations, multinational corporations, like Harley-Davidson is feeling it. Huge tariffs now put on their motorcycles in Western Europe because we're tariffing wine or something else from Western Europe. And this kind of thing can get to be quite a blunder, I think, and eliminate domestic jobs. So he's got a lot of explaining to do on this tariff war of his that he thinks is going to put things back into balance. Well,
Give our speaker a hand.
thank you. Thank you for your patience. I think we can almost close this.
Keep out the no, I didn't get a count yet. They get a count. Who wants to give a rebuttal tonight? Hold up your hand. Hold up your hands if you want. Hold up your hands if you want to give a rebuttal so we can get a count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Somebody, anybody back there? 4, 6, 7. Yeah, we'll go 4 minutes.
Yeah, give me 1 minute, okay?
Yeah, I counted it.
You know, it's amazing to me. Any presidential candidate who starts his campaign by blasting immigrants is not okay by me. The thing is, Trump has done more to get this country off track than I have seen in recent years. What you have to remember is that the United States in about 1993 became an accidental empire. We were the only game left in town after the fall of communism, and we were not able to make the proper decisions or handle ourselves as to what it would take. We enjoyed a peaceful period in the early 90s, and now, since we are the biggest on the block, we're going to be attacked by, terrorists and things like this. I've just finished up really what's happening, and if you look at the NSA, you look at the various intelligence agencies, there ain't nowhere to hide anymore. There ain't no right to privacy anymore. And if they know all this about you anyway, why not bring the free people of movements in here? The thing is that the world is going forward. Other countries are moving and getting more prosperous as they have globalized. And I'm afraid that it's not the natural state of human development. All it takes is a few tariffs. All it takes is a few missed diplomatic opportunities, and the world could again shut down.
Yeah.
And the thing is that a lot of people want it that way because they don't want to change. The thing is that our country in the early 2000s was so focused on terrorism that we didn't know what else was going on around the world, especially in the IT revolution that was going on. Our corporations are more interconnected than ever. You can have the free flow of movement and capital anywhere around the world fast through a click of a mouse. You can have currency trading. You can have investments going all over the place fast. You can talk to anybody. And the only thing that still hasn't kept up with it is the movement of people. And the only reason people move from their native lands is because of some form of persecution, or they want a better life for them and their families. I believe if the United States keeps on going the way it is, and these other countries, get a little bit more prosperous, people won't want to come here. And our demographics are going to be, in the next 10 to 15 years, aging. And there's going to be jobs aplenty. But the thing is, Americans won't fill them because most of them are either gonna be retired or in the medical establishment, and there's gonna be a lot of work. Don't be surprised within the next 15 years if we don't start paying people to come here. Do not be surprised if we do not start paying people to come here. We love the work that the immigrants do, but we hate them as people. We don't want them here. And like any snob, that's the way the United States has been acting in a lot of ways. The remedy? Simple. It's called competition. And China is definitely playing a major player, becoming a major player with it, especially with their one belt, one road policy of integrating the rest of the world. They give you aid with no strings attached like we do. The other major player is probably going to be the former Soviet Union once they get rid of this kleptocracy government that they have in. And so it's going to go. My hope is, yeah, we'll be welcoming immigrants with open arms and actually paying them to come in within about the next 10 to 15 years. So Trump, I hope you'll learn this lesson fast, because demographics and clowns like you don't need to be here.
You're up.
Well, I heard a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but Teddy Roosevelt spoke to the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. He started out by saying, "My fellow immigrants." They never asked him back. So I guess that's, I don't know if that's myth or not. But my fellow immigrants, I can't see very well. I don't see if there are Native Americans here, maybe there are. Frank, maybe. But I think our president asked, oh, why don't people from Norway come here? Why would they want to come here? I suggest that some of us might read The End of White Christian America by Robert Jones. It tells about why some of us whites, I hope it's not me, but are worried about all these people of color coming in. Well, people are dropping out of those white Christian churches, so even the whites aren't in those churches, and the immigrants who are coming in tend to have more children than the rest of us, and so more immigrants are coming in from places of color, and they're having more children, according to the book. Take a look at the book. Thank you.
Okay, the first thing with immigration is we have to remember that there are two different kinds. One are immigrants who come in on a quota, or I don't know what kind of a system they come in on anymore. When I was a kid, it used to be a quota, but now it's if you have a family here, you come in. Like Trump's last wife, her parents came in on that quota, and now they're got their green cards and are very comfortably situated someplace. Anyway, and refugees. So refugees are people who come here claiming that they're fleeing persecution, and I think it's only been relatively recently that women could come and say that they were afraid that their husbands were going to kill them, or their boyfriends or whatever, and so they were fleeing that kind of persecution, and so that's something that they're going to try to take off. So the trends in immigration are really very interesting, and it has to do with oh, I told you I was going to spit on that.
No, it's out of your way now. Sorry.
Thank you. So so you look at the history of the United States, and in the 18th century, we wanted people to come in, But we were kind of restricted because the British had treaties with the Indians that they wouldn't go west of the eastern mountains, the Alleghenies or the Smoky Mountains and all of that. Appalachians, thank you. And then when we won the revolution, one of the things that they did then is start moving west. They went over the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky, which is what my family did, my mother's family. And my son didn't believe it when they went there, and I said, you know, your family was there before you, and he didn't believe that, but it's true. And then they moved further west and further west, and of course threw the Indians off and murdered and sent smallpox infected blankets and the whole business. But we wanted immigrants from Europe, and of course Europe had tons of immigrants because one of the reasons people left Norway and Sweden and the Scandinavian countries and Germany and Austria and Middle and Eastern Europe were because of the persecutions. You had the pogroms in Eastern Europe against Jews, so a whole bunch of Jewish people came in at the end of the 19th century, and so you had a whole shift. You had millions of immigrants coming in. When you look at the charts, it goes up like that until the Civil War. And in the Civil War, we lost over 600,000 soldiers. That doesn't count civilian casualties. That was the largest number of any war that we have ever fought. And in terms of percentage of the population and actual numbers of soldiers that died in the war. In Vietnam, we had 60,000. In the Civil War, we had 600,000, over 600,000. So then we had a lot of people come in until the late 1800s. But then the powers that be realized that white Anglo-Saxon Western European women, except for the Irish who was not included in that. Isn't that interesting? We're having fewer children. And so they made a big push against women, first of all against women having abortions. That's one of the things that happened in the late 1800s, is that abortion became against the law, but it was really made it more difficult actually for low-income women and women of color to get abortions. But part of the impetus was to force women to have children, to make it so that women couldn't control their own pregnancy numbers, which of course didn't work very well. And, oh dear, okay.
Ran over a little bit.
I've got tons more, but at any rate, the whole...
Educators.
But what really happened at the end of the 1800s is they passed the anti-immigration laws, and by the 1930s, the numbers came down from millions to, I think, under 100,000 a year. So you can look at it goes up and then it goes way down. So that by the time of the Depression, there were very few immigrants into this country, even fleeing from the revolutions and everything else in Europe.
Okay. How much time, Andy, for speakers? 4 minutes? Okay. We got a display in front of you now so you can look at your time. It'll also be on the thing there, see?
Yeah, there was a real big difference 150 years ago and now. At that particular time, we were developing industrially in the factories in the east, some in the Midwest. Also, the Civil War was over and the Reconstruction period was over, and the railroads started to develop. And when they had the railroads starting to develop, they needed labor, especially out west in California, because a lot of these workers that were building the railroad knew English. and they heard about gold in San Francisco on the southern properties, and they ran away to dig for gold, to pan for gold. So what happened was, they needed laborers, and they didn't have enough, so they brought in Chinese coolies into the West Coast to build the railroads. The Chinese coolie can have a bowl of rice maybe once or twice a day and get along on it, and they're very hard workers, and they didn't know English, so they couldn't run away to get the gold. So, and then of course the Rockefellers start taking over a lot of the railroads because they had oil at that time, and the Rockefellers wanted a monopoly on the railroads so they could dominate the railroads. So you had a lot of new work. They needed a lot of new workers all over the place, and it's quite different than now. What has happened in Syria is a long story, but there's desertification taking place in India, in Syria, and the United States is urging the people to revolt against the government there, and the situation is quite dangerous, and a lot of them want to get out of there. They want to protect themselves. So they run away to Germany if they could get in, or England if they could get in, or the United States. But now, at that time, like the movie brought out, there was a lot of prejudice against foreigners, and anytime you have development like that, and people working real hard and not getting very much from it, what you have at that type of situation, you need scapegoats. You don't want the ruling class to be blamed for all these things, so they needed scapegoats. So anybody that came in, they scapegoated them. So that way they wouldn't go against the owners of the factories and the bankers. And that's what they done. First there was the Irish, and they made out the Irish were hooligans and would rob from you and steal and stuff like that, constantly fighting and getting drunk. That was the stereotype. And what they done, they brought in after a while what they call the paddy wagons, and that's these big trucks that the police are in picking up people. That's why it's named paddy wagon, because of the name Patrick, which is a typical Irish name.
Okay. All right, next. Watch the wires.
One of the speakers said that this Trump economy is a catastrophe, so bad. It's just the opposite. He's telling you this propaganda that they lied. The black unemployment is all-time low, 41-year low. Women's unemployment, all-time low. Hispanic, low, all-time low. Read the papers, and I read 6 papers. I know what I'm talking about. I don't know. Okay, the stock market, all-time high, just last week. The economy, growing at a 4.2% rate. Obama never had it above 2.5.
Yeah.
And war with South Korea is over. He ended that war that's been for 60 years.
Peacemaker.
He's a peacemaker, right? And
No, he's not.
he put a red line in Syria. He said, if you go over this red line and put that chemical gas, we're gonna. He put all these bombs on Syria, and he hasn't done that since. So this is don't believe all this propaganda and lies.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised at you, Tim. You believe that shit?
No, I just know that with the tariffs he's going to pull in, and all the other stuff that he's going to do with the economy, it's only a matter of a year before we have a downturn, and a big one.
Obama says he did it all.
Hillary would have had the same results if she went into office. It would have been a booming economy. It was all
He should be
done.
in jail. You know that.
So should
We
Trump.
need to reset the clock.
He's a crook.
Reset the clock.
So regarding the last speaker,
Reset the clock.
Trump's claims what were some of Trump's economic victories? The low unemployment, well, you know, it's very easy to manipulate the employment numbers if you're just talking about the quantity of people that have jobs and not talking about the quality of those jobs. If you start looking at the number of people who have jobs where they're working at McDonald's, poverty wage jobs seems to be the dominant, the only job source for so many people who somehow talk themselves into trying to work the system, and it's really is heartbreaking. The economy, like the economy growing and the stock market growing, you know, that is actually, in some respects, it's absolutely true, and who's the benefit of all this spectacular economic growth is the top 5%, 2%, 1%. It's an insanely small percentage of the American people. There's just an article in the paper about how there's a huge, there's a very large increase, like 4% of wealth in this country in stock markets and real estate, but almost all of that goes to the rich. So Trump can pat himself on the back, and there's the 1% that will feed his cause billions of dollars to make sure that those policies and laws stay in place and actually ensure that they don't change and help the rich even more. It's just such a sad situation. The same speaker had asked a question earlier about immigration and was very concerned about the color of the skin of the immigrants. Have you noticed that most immigrants now are not white, which I think is telling about how some people look at this problem. Oh my, look at the color of those people. And it was fairly recently where we celebrated the death of Martin Luther King, and it reminds me of how the famous speech of you judge somebody by the quality of their character and not the color of their skin. It really is heartbreaking. I'm not a left winger or right winger, and I think that there certainly are some legitimate concerns regarding the economics of opening the doors to immigrants. This country, the middle class and the poor, having such a hard problem trying to find jobs, and I think it's worth an open discussion to look at the economics of having an open door policy to people who have economic or political concerns. They're trying to escape these problems. But whenever it starts veering into a discussion about color, it breaks my heart and makes me think that we are falling backwards 200 years.
Next.
Yeah, it's a shame that the media is making a big deal about the unemployment rate. Wages have been stagnant for 30 years or something like that. Used to be you could go to a factory. Who here saw the special on Dayton, Ohio on PBS? That's typical of all America, where Wall Street just sends jobs to Wisconsin, to Mexico and China, and then you're left with a third of what you were making when it was a union shop. So it's a really good special that Dayton, Ohio, deindustrialization, exporting jobs. It was nice having a history speech here, or history presentation with the speaker. But what's that? Oh, okay. I was hoping he'd talk about refugees more, because that's very topical, and immigrants. You know, immigrants and refugees pretty much come from wars all across the world. You know, in America, it started all these oil wars. Tim, I think Syria's an oil war. There's so many oil pipelines. I don't see them having that big of a civil war just because they hate that clown. You know, this has been a horrible fight in Syria, and they have 3 million refugees.
Because you got the
There's a
Soviet.
lot of oil pipeline and infrastructure in Syria. That could be a CIA war.
There was a
oil
lot of drought. There
Halliburton
was a lot of
wars.
drought.
That too, but you gotta listen to the fake media. They're making the narrative. All these Mideast countries are in wars, American oil wars. So we have cheap gasoline and jet fuel. And I was hoping the speaker would talk more about, the situation now with immigrants and refugees. I think it's Americans' responsibility. We made a big mess with all these wars. Granted, Africa has a lot of civil wars. They have refugees too, that I don't think we get any part of. You never know. Could be resources wars in Africa too. But the Middle East, we're encamped in about 7 or 8 countries, various forms of wars, and it's all about oil.
Wait a minute, are they civil wars or are they oil wars?
The Middle East is civil and oil wars in Africa. If you
keep
go
saying there are
Congo,
civil wars and then you say
oil wars are in
it's
the
an oil
Middle
war.
East, and then civil wars are in the African.
I don't think any one
African
of those
continent.
wars is an oil war.
Syria, Iraq is not an oil war. Libya is not an oil war. We have Saudi Arabia fighting a proxy war. We have Israel fighting a proxy war.
Israel is an oil war.
Okay, Lebanon. We have all these other
None of those
countries in the
are oil
Middle
wars.
East that are taking in refugees just so we can have oil wars.
You made that up.
What?
You made that up.
Yeah, I think it's a good narrative.
You just
It's a
made
good
that
story,
up.
and it's true.
They're not one of them is
Well,
an
right,
oil
the
war.
best part is that the Cubs are winning right now.
What is it?
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Lester's up to 110 pitches.
Correct your screen.
Okay, go ahead. You see it?
Yeah, I see it on the laptop, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Adam Balling. I've been to a few of these. I think this is my 4th time coming to College of Complexes. I'm enjoying it more each time. I volunteer with the local libertarians, and I forgot to say during announcements, we've got cards for our slate of candidates statewide, including Cash Jackson and Sanj Mohip for governor and lieutenant governor. Cash was in the debate on Thursday night on NBC. As to immigration topics, the gentleman who was sitting at the table with me and David earlier, or David and me earlier, had asked why so few whites. Europe is a lot more livable now than it used to be, not just because of social democracy, also because it was an American protectorate for a while. We could debate some of the ins and outs of that. And it's also much more economically developed than it used to be. We've all danced around that topic a bit tonight. And on the subject of it, I had asked Peter about the speed at which immigrant groups assimilate and then become nativist in turn. I'd recommend a book that looked at one example of this called How the Irish Became White that I read about 20 years ago. It's by a man named Noel Ignatieff. It has its ups and downs as a read, but it looks at, among other things, gradually being entrusted with things like serving on the police force as one of the things that is used to incorporate, as the title would suggest, Irish Americans who were not even considered white in the way that Anglo-Americans were prior to, say, the Civil War. And you had touched on that earlier with some of your comments as well. I also thought you were talking about the restrictions, Margaret, on abortion at the end of the 19th century. It's also worth remembering that a generation after Margaret Sanger, an advocate of birth control, was also had a kind of eugenics approach. She wanted to limit the births of the less desirable
Actually,
populations.
she left that up to them, and she had birth control for everybody.
She did, but her nativism was part of the stew.
Yeah.
I guess would be my point. Not that she was trying to ram it down their throats. I'm being eclectic as Mr. Paydock would be, and I'm really taking my time. I think you also touched on internal migration, which is interesting. One of the things that has helped make this country so much more conservative in the last 50 years, there were 2 great migrations out of the American South. One African American and one 2.5 times as large of white Southerners who moved to other states and brought some of their Southern style conservatism and backlash attitudes and religiosity with them permanently, or seemingly permanently, into other time zones and other states. And some of this makes, looking at that, the sort of white great migration out of the South, and looking at how the Irish became white, and looking at some of the pressures in social democratic Europe now, panicking about immigration, it makes me wonder about the ease with which collective solidarity can also turn ugly. It can go very us against them very quickly, and not just us, the common people, against the elite or the 1% or something like that. Anyway, I hope to make it to more of these. I've got a daughter due next month, and I'm probably not going to make it to the College of Complexes until she's 5. But this has been a lot of fun. Check out our cards, vote Libertarian this fall, and thank you. Keep up the good work.
Just as our friend Charlie tries to be eclectic, I'm going to try to be brief.
Quiet.
Thank you, Sid.
That's
First of all, with regard to our fellow student, the Trumpophile who spoke earlier, he was busy right and left being, and I put that in that, phrase it that way deliberately, right and left saluting Trump for his so-called accomplishments. Well, I will say simply this. I noticed that in Helsinki, Mr. Trump became one of the few presidents that I know of to committed an act of treason against the American people, as he was busy kissing Vladimir Putin's ass the whole time that he was in Helsinki. And as far as I am concerned, if God willing, we get a Democratic Congress after the election in November, the first order of business is going to be to impeach that son of a bitch and remove his ass from office, period. Thank you.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our good friend Peter Perro for an outstanding presentation that was up to his usual high standards.
All right, I too think, Peter, it was good presentation. All right, let me eclectic as usual, I guess. Cover a lot of topics here. Yeah, regarding the economy, I just sent that figure out. Been sending out information on this for a number of years on the distribution of wealth within the United States and the CEO compensation versus the standard employed person in the United States. Once again, as the disparity has gotten greater. So all that wealth is not reaching 99% of the people or 90% of the people here. Regarding oil wars, we're going to be having a thing here on the, what do you call it, the deep state. And I was listening to, reading a book by an author today, and like here you say, well, every war is an oil war. It's all oil. This guy says every war, everything that took place historically in the United States since the Kennedy assassination was due to the deep state. I said it's sort of like God is the explanation for everything. Very convenient, you know. And I said, you know, this is amazing. He actually even claimed that when Johnson, some things like Lyndon Johnson didn't run for election because of the deep state. And I'm going, this administrative offices, what does that have to do with, you know, that's what I mean. So you're carrying it too far here. There's been struggles in the Middle East going on for decades there happens to be religious elements to these conflicts.
It's not
There happen to be a number of bad operatives. Saddam Hussein, who envisioned himself the Caliph of Baghdad. And you think these neighbors, and plus you bring in other people, such as the Russians, and the British still like to think they're running things. You could throw in the French. Not even the Chinese, from what I understand. So, and say, well, this is an oil war, that's,
Oil war.
yeah, let's have nothing but simplistic explanations of all the events in the world, or omnibus ones. Now, regarding immigration, that's all right, he doesn't know anything. Immigration was not an issue in this country until, honestly, you did have the Know Nothing Party in the late 1900s, but only in 1917 did we really see the appearance of legislation regarding immigration into the United States. You had such things as the Palmer raids. They were fearful that there'd be red communist influence arriving, and conceivably these were revolutionaries who were bringing their concepts of socialism into the United States. To some extent that was legitimate. Some of these German socialists, and there had been disturbances, labor type situations, but this thing greatly feared those who set the policy of the United States, specifically the capitalist industrialists, who said this is now coming, they want to restrict and take away our power and our accrued wealth, and that any of those people have to be filtered. And they even, not only did they restrict those coming in, they got rid of certain other people like Goldman and others at the same time. Now regarding, it still has not been resolved. The United States at present, we're building a wall, but we have no immigration legislation. Do you realize the last serious one was Kennedy, McCain, going back any number of years? And even that didn't get anywhere. We got plenty of time now. Not going to be rushed when we got half an hour to go. We got off questions on top of it. And if there's such wonderful globalization and wealth everywhere, why are people coming here at all? They just sit at home and walk down the block and get one of them high-paying jobs in the sweatshop, that just opened in their third world country. Tim? Oh, just wait. Any day now, there'll be a factory here. And it's probably right. Why come here, Now, regarding Ellis Island, that other thing is, the arrivals at Ellis Island, yes, from what I understand, those that did have illnesses were a very small percentage. Very small. And now this could be the propaganda of the Immigration Naturalization Service, but they're very small percentage, and I honestly believe they had very nice accommodations and medical treatment and care, and as a result of that, very few people were excluded from entering the United States. And there certainly were none of those conditions, from what I've read of the things, that they were putting children in cages or anything approximating that. It was just the opposite. I've never read anything that, and I hope someday they restore Ellis Island, but it was a very nice treatment of the people. I mean, they had things where you were arguing about transportation, and when you went through processing, which was relatively simple, the last part of it, they were even so thoughtful enough that you had transportation representatives at the end of the line after you were done getting processed into the States, so that if you wanted like a train ticket, if you wanted to get around New York City and things like that, they had that all provided for, so that they just didn't put you out on the shore and stuff like that. They saw to it that you got further on your destination towards the home or your place of that you wanted to get to. Now the last thing I want to talk about is his current executive orders that came out on May 20th. Executive orders, not an area I'm really an expert on, but they do have some seriousness in setting the policy of the United States. Trump was putting out executive orders like every little day. There are even things, I don't know if you saw on Facebook, they'd have these things where he'd sign it and show it like this, like a kid. You know, they were laughing, you know, stupid. Every day. And I'm going, executive orders, sometimes I was involved in writing them. It would take 6 months or a year. As the policy was thought through very carefully. You have to look for unforeseen consequences. It was like writing the law of the United States, which have even greater effect. You look at these things, there are many meanings. Even when they're issued, there are meanings that regard their implementation, interpretation. But they're putting these things out like every other day of the week.
Charlie.
And I'm going, where do they get the right to do this? So they put one out about children. And yeah, it backfires, it's not surprising. And yeah, exactly what they did. This is serious business, running the government of the United States. You've got some complete idiots in this White House staff. That's not just rumors, that's a fact. And this is direct evidence that they can't even put out executive orders, which have never caused controversy before. That's what I mean, they're not really known. They're kind of read and followed and implemented, and that's about it. And these guys are incapable of putting,
Okay, Charlie, it's been 8 minutes.
That's ridiculous. All right, thank you.
They're not idiots, they're up to the 6th grade.
Who else? Who else?
7th grade?
Okay, Andy.
I'm the last required.
What? Congratulations, by the way.
Okay, Nick.
Oh.
I have 3 books here that I want to show you that talk about the incidents we had last week. We had, if you look at the tape, if you look at the video from last week, we had 3 examples of people in the audience that attacked me for listing facts that are documented by thousands of scientists. Now, these 3 books are about the media monopoly. Ben Bagdickian, he wrote this in 1984, his first edition. He said, 50 rich people control what we see and hear on all the major news. 50 people. And his 5th edition in 1998 or something, he said the number has shrunk down to 6. 6 rich billionaires control what's on the airwaves, in the news, what's there and what isn't, what's blacked out.
What is it called?
It's called Media Monopoly. It's one of the all-time classics on media. Okay, the second one is Censored News. Censored News from 2003. This comes out of Sonoma State University. This is the 2003 edition, and they were beginning to talk about 9/11 and other issues even back then. But Censored News gives you the top 25 censored, blacked out stories that would change America overnight if they were covered rather than being blacked out. Both of these. This is the 2018 edition, came out last October. The 2019 edition, oh, this one incidentally, the issue, the 2017 issue, Barnes & Noble claim they couldn't get it until after the presidential election because that issue was loaded with articles on voter suppression, voter theft, people being thrown off the rolls. If that had been available in October and people were more alert, Trump might not be in there. So they held it back until after Trump was in the White House, then they released it. So the censored 2019 edition is coming out in October. It's October 2nd, a couple of weeks. What's the time, Kim? Are you running it?
8:28.
No, 2:27 right now. No,
last week, I would like to explain something, if you guys would just listen for a minute. I've been telling you I run the Northwest Information Service with my brother. We translate books like this, we call it database translation, on several different subjects. We publish briefing papers that summarize 5,000 pages of forensic evidence. When I tell you something is a fact, it's because it's backed by 5,000 scientists on that particular subject all over the world. It's not my opinion. Last week, I gave some facts out that are completely non-controversial in other countries around the world on a couple of subjects, and 3 people were looking immediately to slander me, saying I'm putting out propaganda. They totally violated one of the rules of the complex. It says one fool at a time and no personal attacks. So I had to get up and say, you don't have a right to attack anybody personally. When you hear a piece of information that you're unfamiliar with, or let's say you're very knowledgeable on one subject, but you're terrifyingly ignorant of 5,000 scientists have been publishing this stuff for 30 years, and the media blacks it out. We have people all through this audience every week who are really virtually expert on some subject and another, but they're living in a blind bubble that's described by the media.
Wait a minute, are you saying your assertions are beyond challenge? No one can contradict.
Listen up,
What, do you
Charlie.
like the book?
Listen up, Charlie. Shut the fuck up.
No, your
I'm sorry.
assertions can be questioned.
I'm sorry. I just got
Do you
through
like the
saying,
Bible?
these
Charlie,
are
it's
my
not your turn to
assertions.
talk.
One fool at a time, Charlie.
Charlie is showing us again how you heckle and attack somebody personally because you just want to heckle and attack them.
No, you're claiming superiority over all of us.
I'm not claiming anything, Charlie. I'm just saying, look at what the scientists have published. It's not my
You
opinion.
got your excerpts, I got mine.
No.
No?
Well, you,
No, I don't have
let me
any.
say one other
Charlie, you
thing.
have time to talk when it's your fucking turn.
Let me say one other thing. Out of all the facts I have given you since 2007, facts that are summarized by databases, thousands of scientists on each different subject, nobody, Charlie included, has ever countered that with any scientific knowledge whatsoever. All they can do is what Charlie just did. Attack me personally and call it, oh, these 5,000 scientists, some with Nobel Prizes. That's Andy's assertion. Well, I gotta tell you, none of those scientists contacted me when they were on their way to a Nobel Prize for 30 years worth of work in the various subjects. So when I give a talk on something and say, here's the database, here's what the scientists say, don't attack me personally and say, well, that's just your opinion, Andy, because I'm not giving you any kind of opinion, okay? Thank you. And one other thing, the country is deeply divided right now between people who know who and what Trump is and what he isn't. Because the media are keeping people in the dark. Trump has been money laundering with the Russians for the last 20 years with the Russian mob, just for one thing. And the Supreme Court justices, both Gorsuch and now Kavanaugh, those people are from the Federalist Society. They're politicians. They're very smart. They're attractive. They're well-spoken. They look like ordinary. They can present themselves. They're psychopathically skilled at lying. They make it sound real.
Okay.
So that's how they get on the courts. And then the reason this is, if you haven't read anything on Kavanaugh yet, Kavanaugh is the last piece of the puzzle they need to change the country. It'll be a 5-4 majority of politicians on the court that will just eliminate environmental rights, human rights, women's rights, all down the line. That's why we have to fight Kavanaugh. Thank you.
All right, Peter, get the last word.
All right, tremendous diversity in this room, yes. But that was my subject tonight, and from a historical view, yes, the immigrant issue, migrants, from a historical view. But we can't help but see it explode in controversies already in the news that has affected so many of us who spoke tonight. Someone just mentioned in the rebuttal Canada. And Canada is growing in its diversity without antagonism within its country. Let's share in that or get back to that. China, someone mentioned, with this Belt and Road world development. Let's share in that or get back to doing it ourselves. Keep an eye on that. This Belt and Road will come up later. I think in October we have some team who's already been to China, and they'll come and talk to us about that. That's coming. I can't wait. But most of all, let's not lose the labor force that has developed the country we have now in the past 100 years, over 100 years, thanks to migrant muscle. The ambition, and don't cut off or thwart the ambition or high expectations and hopes that these young immigrants do have for us, and some national, national spark or light that we've been able to kindle for so long that's starting to flicker. I hate to see that snuff out. Let's keep the historic and economic miracle as fueled by immigrants alive and well. In our time, whether it's during Trump's administration or if we have to wait till it's over, let's get it back and become the country we've been for over 150 years. So thank you.
Okay, Andy, handle us out.
Yeah,
All right, that's it for tonight. We're gavelled out at the College of Complexes. We'll see you all next week. Thank you for coming.
McCarthy is.
You're in favor of bringing back McCarthy?
No, they're talking about next week. I'm pushing you.
Never here if I live. Yeah, I fully intend. Yeah, be well. Yeah, you do.
Could it be a sin?
Wouldn't be developed.
Part of your life and